The manager of a luxury hotel humiliated a millionaire for being black without realizing she was the new owner of the hotel. But the worst part was when he discovered that she was his. Naira Blackwell was reclining in the back seat of her luxury car, her gaze lost on her phone screen while the city lights danced across the window. Her fingers glided smoothly over the glass, though her mind wandered far, obsessed with every detail of her upcoming stay at the Royal Crest Hotel. Naira's assistants had confirmed everything was perfectly arranged, and it wasn't her first time staying at such a magnificent establishment. Yet, this time, a disturbing feeling tangled in her chest, a cocktail of nostalgia and unease she couldn't identify. Could it be that in the luxurious halls of the Royal Crest, she awaited not only a dream retreat, but also the echo of a family betrayal so devastating it threatened to collapse the pillars of her life? When the car stopped in front of the hotel's imposing building, Naira took a deep breath and allowed herself to take in the facade. The Royal Crest rose like a jewel of the city. Its white marble structure and reflective glass symbolized prestige and exclusivity. Yet, for Naira, that place represented more than luxury. It embodied an unresolved mystery, an emptiness that had been present in her life for years. Her father had disappeared from this very place over a decade ago, and since then, she had sought answers. The driver opened her door, softly whispering, "Welcome, Ms. Blackwell," as he helped her out of the car. Naira, impeccably dressed in a black suit that emphasized her slender figure, walked with determined steps toward the hotel entrance. She felt the eyes upon her, something that always happened. She knew her presence didn't go unnoticed. Being a black woman, multimillionaire, and confidently carrying herself in a place like the Royal Crest wasn't common, and most of the time, it wasn't well received. As she crossed through the automatic glass doors, the lobby enveloped her in its atmosphere of elegance. The gleaming marble floors, the chandeliers hanging from towering ceilings, everything spoke of exclusivity. But Naira wasn't there to admire the luxury. Her objective was clear: to spend the night there, observe, and above all, confront the memories of the past. She approached the front desk, where a young blonde woman with a forced smile looked at her with a mix of confusion and disdain. "Good evening. I have a reservation under Naira Blackwell," she said in a serene tone, though internally she prepared for the tension she knew would come. The receptionist blinked a few times and then, without a word, began typing on the computer in front of her. The seconds felt endless as Naira kept an unbothered expression, though she noticed the nervous whispering between two staff members near the reception. "I'm sorry, but it seems we don't have any rooms available at the moment," the receptionist said, looking up at Naira with an expression that couldn't hide her judgment. Naira slightly furrowed her brow, but maintained her composure. "That's not possible," she responded. "I have a confirmed reservation. My assistant made sure everything was in order. Could you check again?" The receptionist shot a quick glance at one of the managers across the lobby. It was Thomas Fitzpatrick, a middle-aged man with perfectly groomed hair and an expression that radiated arrogance. Thomas approached the front desk with a cold smile, one of those smiles that felt more like a warning than a welcome. "What seems to be the problem here?" Thomas asked, though he seemed to have a clear idea of the situation. "This lady claims to have a reservation," the receptionist said, gesturing toward Naira, "but there don't appear to be any available rooms." Thomas looked her up and down, a gaze that was anything but professional. "Oh, I see," he said, his tone brimming with condescension. "I apologize for the misunderstanding, ma'am, but it seems there was an error in our system. Unfortunately, we have no rooms to offer you tonight." Naira felt the heat rise through her body, but it wasn't from embarrassment. It was a contained anger she had learned to disguise over the years. She knew what was happening. She had seen it too many times in her life: the excuses, the looks, the subtle yet undeniable discrimination. "Curious," Naira said in a controlled voice. "I've stayed in several hotels of this chain, and there's never been a problem. I wonder what could be the reason for this error." Thomas kept his smile, though his eyes showed no warmth. "It's unfortunate this happened, but our procedures are clear. We have nothing further to offer you tonight. Nara looked at him directly, with a serenity that hid the storm within her. She had learned long ago not to fight on her enemy's turf. Instead of getting angry or creating a scene, she decided to confront him in a way he wouldn't expect. "I understand," Nara replied. "If you don't have rooms, then you don't. I'm not one to force my way into a place where I'm not welcome." Thomas's eyes narrowed as if he had expected a more dramatic, more emotional reaction. "I apologize for the inconvenience, Ms. Blackwell," he said with a courtesy that felt hollow. "Perhaps next time we'll have the pleasure of hosting you under better circumstances." Nara gave a slight smile, inclining her head. "Maybe," she said, as she calmly picked up her suitcase and turned toward the exit. "Maybe next time, the circumstances will be very different." And with those words, she walked out of the hotel, leaving Thomas with a look of slight discomfort. Though he didn't yet know, he had just made a monumental mistake. A mistake that Nara wasn't willing to forget. As she sat back in the car, Nara allowed herself to exhale the breath she had been holding. She knew there was no sense in arguing with people like Thomas. Power wasn't displayed in a direct confrontation, but in the actions taken afterward. Nara didn't just want revenge, she wanted justice. She knew what she had to do, and as the car moved through the city's illuminated streets, she began planning her first steps in her mind. "Take me home," she said to the driver, her voice firm, though her thoughts went far beyond that simple instruction. She knew that soon enough, the Royal Crest Hotel would be hers. And then, everything would change. The city continued its frenetic rhythm as Nara watched through the window of her office, located in one of the tallest skyscrapers. From there, she could see the hustle and bustle of urban life, cars and people moving back and forth, completely oblivious to the plans she was weaving. Only a few days had passed since her humiliating encounter at the Royal Crest Hotel, but the experience remained fresh in her mind. She couldn't stop thinking about Thomas Fitzpatrick and his arrogance, about how they had treated her as if she had no worth, as if she didn't belong to that world of luxury. But Nara was not a woman who allowed herself to be underestimated. If life had taught her anything through the challenges she had faced, it was that true strength lay not in immediate reaction, but in long-term strategy. And her plan was underway. In her hand, she held a confidential file, a collection of documents her team had gathered about the Royal Crest Hotel and the chain it belonged to. The information it contained was far more interesting than she had anticipated. Discovering that the hotel chain, owned by a powerful family with influential connections, had a history of corruption and questionable practices was no surprise. But what truly shook her was finding a connection between her late father and the chain. Nara took a deep breath and opened the file once again, reviewing the details she already knew, but that made more sense with each reading. Her father, Malik Blackwell, had disappeared more than 15 years ago, and although he had worked as an influential businessman, his disappearance had always been shrouded in mystery. No one seemed to have answers, and her mother, in her desperation, had spent years trying to find any clue, but without success. Until now. The hotel's name had appeared several times in her father's financial records before his disappearance. Large sums, money movements that had no clear explanation. Nara felt more determined than ever. She was not only fighting for personal revenge against Thomas and the hotel that had humiliated her, but now it seemed she was closer to understanding what had happened to her father. The sound of her office door opening pulled her from her thoughts. Oliver Clark, her trusted attorney, entered with his usual firm stride. They had been working together for years, and if there was anyone Nara trusted to help her unravel this mystery, it was him. "I have good news," Oliver said, placing a few folders on her desk and taking a seat across from her. "After some strategic maneuvers, we've managed to secure control of the Royal Crest Hotel. Through the shell companies we set up, no one suspects you're the new owner. Fitzpatrick and his team have no idea what's coming." Nara smiled for the first time in days, a smile of satisfaction. Everything was going according to plan. "That's excellent, Oliver." Her voice was firm, but it contained a mix of determination and excitement. "Now, I want to take control of the operations from the inside. I don't want Fitzpatrick or anyone to suspect anything until I'm ready to expose him." Oliver nodded, though his expression grew a bit more serious. "Naira, I reviewed the documents you gave me about your father's disappearance once more. There's something darker in all of this more than we thought. The hotel chain has connections to several shady characters, dangerous people. Whatever you're planning, make sure to be careful. You're not just dealing with a group of corrupt businessmen, but possibly something bigger." Naira looked him in the eye, understanding the warning. She knew the risk was there, but she wasn't someone who backed down when faced with a battle. "I know, Oliver. And believe me, I'm ready for whatever comes. My father died without answers. If the Royal Crest has anything to do with his disappearance, I'll find out, and I'll make sure those responsible pay." Oliver watched her for a moment before nodding firmly. He knew there was no way to dissuade her once Naira was determined. "In that case, I'll proceed with the next steps. Soon you'll have full access to the hotel's finances and internal documents. If there's anything linking them to Malik's disappearance, we'll find it." Naira closed the file in front of her and leaned back in her chair, looking at Oliver with determination. "Thank you, Oliver. This isn't just about justice for my father. It's about making them understand that no one underestimates or humiliates me. This is my chance to show who I really am." Oliver rose from his chair, ready to continue with the plans. "I know. And when the time comes, I'll be right by your side." When Oliver left, Naira was alone in her office, looking out over the city lights. She knew the days ahead would be full of challenges, but she also knew she couldn't turn back. Everything she had built in her life had prepared her for this moment. Every time someone had underestimated her for being a woman, for being black, she had learned to rise stronger. That same night, Naira headed to the Royal Crest, but this time with a new purpose. She wore a simple yet elegant suit that radiated confidence. She walked through the same lobby where she had been humiliated days before, but this time, everything was different. Her gaze no longer carried the insecurity or the sting of rejection. This time, her mind was focused, her heart resolute. Thomas Fitzpatrick, unaware of everything going on around him, continued with his daily work at the hotel. When Naira walked through the lobby door once again, he saw her from afar, his eyes exuding the same arrogance as always. However, this time, she deliberately ignored him, knowing that soon he would be at her mercy. She went straight to the administrative office, where she was greeted by one of the new managers she had secretly appointed. Everything was in motion. In a matter of weeks, Naira would have full access to financial documents and personal files of the former executives. Any trace of the chain's involvement in her father's disappearance would soon come to light. "Is everything ready for my review?" Naira asked as she sat down in a stylish leather armchair in the office. "Yes, Ms. Blackwell," the manager replied. "We've compiled all the hotel's historical files, and they are now available in your name. No one suspects a thing." Naira nodded, satisfied. "Perfect. It's only a matter of time before everything comes to light." As she spoke, she couldn't help but feel a mixture of emotions: revenge, justice, pain, but above all, a deep sense of closure. The Royal Crest was just the beginning. She knew that, with patience, she would uncover the truth about her father, and when she did, it would be much more than mere revenge. It would be her way of reclaiming everything her family had lost. That night, as she returned to her car, Naira looked once more at the hotel's imposing building. She knew that soon, everything she had planned would come to fruition. And when the time came, Thomas Fitzpatrick would not only fear her as the woman he had humiliated. He would fear her because she would own his world, and he would have no idea how it happened. The game had only just begun. The days passed with an apparent calm at the Royal Crest Hotel, but beneath the surface, Naira was weaving her revenge with surgical precision. No one, not even Thomas Fitzpatrick, suspected what was happening in the shadows. The hotel continued operating with its usual luxury, welcoming wealthy clients and celebrities, unaware that a profound transformation was underway. Now in full possession of the hotel, Naira had begun making changes. The first thing she ordered was a detailed analysis of the Royal Crest's financial records and old documents. She knew that somewhere, hidden among contracts and secret agreements, was the clue she needed to uncover what had happened to her father. It was a winding path, filled with obstacles, but Nara was determined to follow it to the end. One afternoon, while in her office, Nara received a call from Oliver Clark. His voice was graver than usual, which immediately put her on alert. "Nara, we've found something. I think you should come to the office to see it for yourself." Without asking questions, Nara rose from her chair and grabbed her coat. She knew this moment would come, but now that it was so close, her heart raced, filled with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. Upon arriving at Oliver's office, she found him seated behind his desk, surrounded by papers and digital documents open on his computer. "What do you have?" Nara asked, her voice firm but expectant. Oliver slid a file toward her. Nara took it and began reading. At first, the words seemed blurred, until suddenly, a name appeared that froze her: Malik Blackwell. Her father. "This document is part of a transaction your father was about to close with the former owner of the Royal Crest," Oliver explained. "But what's really striking is that this transaction was never completed. And what's even more troubling, after that meeting, your father disappeared without a trace." Nara continued reading, her gaze fixed on the words. Everything seemed to make sense now. Her father had been involved in something much bigger than she'd imagined, something that might have cost him his life. "The previous owner, what do we know about him?" Nara asked, a lump in her throat. Oliver sighed. "The former owner was part of a powerful family. The Fitzgeralds, owners of several luxury properties around the country. But there's more. Through some discreet investigations, we discovered that the hotel chain has been laundering money for years, using its properties as a front. And your father, for some reason, got entangled in that web." The air in the room grew heavy. Nara couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her father's disappearance hadn't been a mere accident or a failed business case. It was something much darker, something that now involved people with power and influence, people who didn't want the truth to come to light. "Do you think they killed him?" Nara asked in a low voice, almost dreading the answer. Oliver looked at her, his eyes filled with concern. "It's a possibility, Nara. But it's also possible that he's still alive somewhere. It all depends on how much he knew and how dangerous he became for them." Nara closed her eyes for a moment, trying to process the information. She didn't know what was worse, discovering that her father had been murdered by a group of criminals, or that, after all these years, he was still alive, but trapped in an impossible situation. "So, this isn't just a personal vendetta against Thomas Fitzpatrick," Nara said, opening her eyes slowly. "This is much bigger. I have to get to the bottom of this, not just for me but for my father." Oliver nodded, understanding the magnitude of what was at stake. "There's something else," Oliver said, pulling out another document. "Thomas Fitzpatrick's name appears in several recent deals related to the hotel chain. He's not just a manager. It seems he's been involved in expanding these shady businesses. If we want to catch them, he might be the key." Nara felt her rage bubbling up inside her. Thomas hadn't just humiliated her, he was directly linked to the network that could have caused her father's disappearance. It was as if destiny had drawn a dark path that now led her to the truth. "I have to confront him," Nara said, her voice firm. "But not yet. I need to be sure I have everything necessary to bring him down. I can't afford to make a mistake on this." Oliver nodded, knowing that Nara wasn't one to make rash decisions. "Remember, Nara, we're dealing with dangerous people. It's not just your name or reputation at stake, but your safety as well." Nara looked him in the eyes, her determination clear. "I don't care about the risk. I'm not going to stop until I find the truth. Thomas will pay, and so will everyone behind this." Days later, Nara returned to the Royal Crest, this time with a clearer strategy. She knew she had to play her cards carefully, which meant that, for now, she would keep her identity as the hotel's owner a secret. She decided to visit the hotel unannounced as an ordinary guest. She wanted to closely observe the internal operations and, above all, see how Thomas acted when he believed no one was watching. As she walked through the hotel corridors, she felt a strange mix of power and vulnerability. She knew everything in that building belonged to her, but there were still secrets she hadn't uncovered, mysteries that continued to haunt her. At the reception, she saw Thomas attending to a group of wealthy clients. His demeanor was the same as always, accommodating but with a palpable arrogance. He moved with the confidence of someone who believed he had everything under control. Nara watched him from a distance, feeling her desire to confront him grow, but knowing it wasn't yet the time. She decided to explore the hotel at a slow pace, studying details that would normally go unnoticed. While doing so, she found a door on the ground floor, a door she hadn't seen before, that appeared to lead to the basement. Something in her instinct told her she had to investigate. When she was sure no one was watching, she pushed the door and descended the stone steps. The basement was dark and cold, a maze of hallways that seemed to lead nowhere. However, one room at the end of a long corridor caught her attention. It was small and locked, but Nara, determined, managed to open it with a MasterCard she'd obtained as the hotel's owner. Inside the room, she found something unexpected, an old, dusty safe. She opened it cautiously, and what she found inside took her breath away. Documents, old photos, transaction records. Everything pointed to her father's disappearance. And in one of the photos, among a group of men, was Thomas Fitzpatrick, younger, but clearly linked to the hotel chain's dark past. Nara felt her hands tremble as she held the photo. She had finally found the first tangible piece connecting her to her father. And she knew, now more than ever, that there was no turning back. The past was coming to light, and Nara was ready to face it. Nara stood still, holding the photograph of Thomas Fitzpatrick in her hands, her breath held as if the air in the basement had changed. The image seemed frozen in time. Thomas, younger, with the same air of arrogance, surrounded by men Nara didn't immediately recognize. But in the background, standing slightly apart from the group, was Malik Blackwell, her father. His face was serious, as if he knew something wasn't right, as if he sensed he was in danger. The weight of the truth began to sink into her chest. Her father had been involved with these people, but not by choice. Something had dragged him into that world, into those dark dealings that Nara was now uncovering. She sat down in an old chair, still in the basement, holding the photo in one hand and the documents in the other. The dampness of the place and the echo of her thoughts made the reality feel harsher, more painful. Her father had been so close, yet so far from her. All her life she had fought to find answers, and now that the pieces were starting to fit, the only thing she felt was an immense void, an abyss of unresolved emotions. There was hope, but there was also fear. Nara knew she was stepping into dangerous territory. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of her phone vibrating in her pocket. It was Oliver. "Nara, are you okay?" "I haven't seen you since this morning," he said, with a tone that conveyed concern. Nara took a deep breath, trying to keep her composure. "I've found something important," she said, her words measured. "I'm at the Royal Crest. There's more here than we thought. Thomas is directly connected to my father's disappearance." There was a brief silence on the other end before Oliver responded. "Are you alone? Is it safe for you to be there?" "Don't worry. No one knows I'm here. But I need you to come. There are documents you need to see," Nara replied as she stood up and grabbed a box full of old files. "I'm on my way," Oliver said, quickly hanging up. Nara, with the box in her hands, began to climb the stairs, feeling the weight of the years, the secrets, and the mystery that was slowly unfolding. She knew this was only the beginning of something much larger, but she was unwilling to stop. Her father deserved justice, and Thomas Fitzpatrick was going to face the consequences. An hour later, Oliver arrived at the hotel and met Nara in a small office on the ground floor, where they had brought the documents and the safe. Both sat in silence as they reviewed the files together. The pages were yellowed with time, but still legible, and what they revealed was disturbing. "Here it is," Oliver said, pointing to a contract. "This is the transaction your father was about to finalize with the Fitzgeralds. But look at this clause. There's a series of payments that were never made. These payments are linked to offshore bank accounts. Someone was diverting funds, and it looks like Malik found out. Naira nodded as she read carefully. Her father wasn't just involved in a financial transaction, he had witnessed something bigger, something that had likely cost him his life. This explains why he disappeared, Naira said softly. He knew too much. He was about to expose them. Oliver looked at her with a mixture of admiration and concern. And you're about to do the same, Naira. If these documents come to light, you could bring down the entire hotel chain, and not just Thomas. We're talking about a much larger corruption network. But you have to know that if you go forward, they'll see you as a threat. This isn't just revenge anymore. It's a war. Naira raised her gaze, meeting Oliver's eyes. I'm ready. I'm not stopping now. My father died for this. I won't stay silent. I want the world to know the truth, and I want Thomas Fitzpatrick to pay for everything. Oliver nodded, understanding Naira's unbreakable resolve. He knew she wouldn't back down, and he wouldn't leave her alone in this battle. All right, then let's move forward. But we need a plan. We can't just expose this out of nowhere. We have to be strategic, Oliver said, his mind already working on how to proceed. Naira nodded. She knew that taking on such a powerful organization would require patience and a meticulous strategy. The first thing is to make sure these documents get to the right people, Naira said. But before that, I want to confront Thomas. I want him to know that I know everything, that he has no way out. A few days later, Naira arranged a private meeting at the Royal Crest. There was only one guest, Thomas Fitzpatrick. The meeting was set for the end of the day when the hotel would be quieter, without the distraction of guests or the usual bustle of staff. Thomas arrived at the office with his usual arrogance. He had no idea what was about to happen. When he entered, he saw Naira seated behind the desk, her posture relaxed, but her gaze as sharp as a knife. Miss Blackwell, to what do I owe the pleasure of this meeting? Thomas asked, his tone condescending as he settled into a chair in front of her. Naira didn't respond immediately. She took her time, letting the silence grow between them. Finally, she pulled the photograph from the box and placed it on the desk, slowly turning it toward Thomas. The change in Thomas's expression was subtle but noticeable. His smile faded, his eyes narrowed, and his hands tensed slightly on the armrests of the chair. "What is this?" he asked, though he clearly already knew the answer. "It's a photo from more than 15 years ago," Naira replied, her tone firm. "There you are, next to the Fitzgeralds and my father, Malik Blackwell. Do you remember him?" Thomas didn't respond. His gaze hardened, but Naira could see the nervousness behind his eyes. "What are you insinuating?" Thomas asked, though his voice started to tremble slightly. "I'm not insinuating anything. I'm stating it," Naira said, standing up and moving closer to the desk. "My father disappeared after a meeting with you and the Fitzgeralds. I found evidence that the hotel chain has been involved in money laundering for years, and that my father was about to expose it. And you knew everything. You were there." The silence became oppressive. Thomas rose from his chair, his eyes filled with fury and fear. "You don't know who you're dealing with, Naira," he said, his tone menacing. "This goes far beyond what you can imagine. If you keep going down this path, they'll destroy you. They'll destroy us all." Naira stood firm, not backing down. "I'm not afraid of your threats, Thomas. I've come too far to stop now. And believe me, when all this comes to light, you'll be the first to fall." Thomas looked at her for a few seconds before stepping toward the door. "You'll regret this," was his final statement before leaving the office, leaving Naira alone, but more determined than ever. She knew the war was just beginning, but she also knew she was ready to face everything. The meeting with Thomas Fitzpatrick had left a deep mark on Naira. Although she had maintained her composure throughout the confrontation, when she was alone in the office, the weight of everything she was facing hit her hard. She knew she was entering dangerous territory, but she also knew she couldn't back down. Each step brought her closer to the truth about her father and to the justice she had longed for. That night, as silence filled her apartment, Naira couldn't stop thinking about Thomas's last words. "You'll regret this." She knew it wasn't just an empty threat. She was dealing with people who would do anything to protect themselves, and the deeper she dug, the more she exposed herself to real danger. But she also knew that if she turned back now, she would never get the answers she sought. The next morning, Oliver called her early. "Nara, I've reviewed the documents you brought from the hotel's basement. There's enough evidence to take this to the authorities, but I think we should be cautious." "We can't trust just anyone," he said, with evident concern in his voice. Nara nodded, though she knew Oliver couldn't see her. "I know, Oliver, but we can't keep waiting. We have to act before they do. Thomas already suspects we're onto something big. He's not going to stand still." Oliver was silent for a moment before responding. "I have a contact within the FBI, someone I trust completely. I could bring the case to him, but it'll be risky. Once this goes public, there's no turning back." Nara took a deep breath. The fear was there, lurking, but more than fear, she felt an immense responsibility. Her father hadn't had the chance to fight these criminals. But she did. "Do it," Nara replied firmly. "I want everything to come to light, no matter the cost." A few weeks later, Nara and Oliver met in a small conference room in a government building. Oliver's contact, FBI agent Jack Thompson, was a tall, serious-looking man, but there was a warmth in his eyes that reassured Nara. As they reviewed the documents they had brought, Jack nodded continuously, taking notes in silence. "This is huge," he finally said, laying the papers on the table. "We're talking about a criminal operation involving money laundering, extortion, and possibly influence peddling. If all this is true, not only will Thomas Fitzpatrick fall, but also several big players within the hotel chain. But I must warn you, it won't be easy. These people have resources, and they won't hesitate to use all their power to defend themselves." Nara looked at him with determination. "I know, but we can't stop now. Not after everything we've uncovered." Jack nodded, admiring her courage. "We'll take the first steps, but you need to keep a low profile. We can't alert them until everything is in place." The meeting concluded with a clear plan. The FBI would start a covert investigation, gathering more evidence before proceeding with arrests. But for Nara, time moved differently. Each passing day, she felt the pressure mounting. She knew Thomas wouldn't sit idly by, and that fear became reality sooner than she expected. One night, as Nara returned to her apartment, she noticed something strange. The hallway lights were dimmer than usual, and the silence was unsettling. When she inserted the key into the lock, something in her instinct screamed that something was wrong. Upon entering, her heart sank. The place was in disarray. Papers, books, and documents were scattered across the floor. Someone had been there. She ran to her desk, where she had kept copies of the most important documents, but everything was gone. Nara felt a wave of fear she had never experienced before. This wasn't a simple robbery, it was a message. They knew what she was doing. Quickly, she took her phone and called Oliver. "They broke into my apartment," she said, her voice trembling with rage and fear. "They took the documents. They knew exactly what to look for." Oliver cursed on the other end of the line. "Get out of there now, Nara. Go somewhere safe. This is only the beginning." Nara took a deep breath, trying to control the panic that threatened to overwhelm her. She knew she couldn't stay there. She quickly grabbed her purse, some essentials, and left the building, feeling as though every shadow on the street was watching her. As she drove to a hotel far from her apartment, her mind couldn't stop thinking about her father. Had he gone through the same thing? Had he felt the same sense of impending danger before he disappeared? Now she understood better than ever. She was fighting against something much bigger than she had imagined, but she wasn't willing to give up. Upon arriving at the hotel, Oliver was waiting for her in the lobby. He approached quickly, his face full of worry. "We can't keep going like this, Nara. They're going to keep pressing until they destroy you." Nara looked at him, her eyes full of determination despite her fear. "I don't care what they do. I'm already in this, Oliver. I'm not going to back down." Oliver sighed, knowing he couldn't change her mind. He stepped closer and took her hands. "I know, but you're not alone in this. We're going to make sure they pay for everything." Days later, Naira received a call from Jack Thompson. They had made significant progress in the investigation. The FBI had gathered enough evidence to proceed with arrests, and the names coming to light were shocking. Not only was Thomas Fitzpatrick involved, but also several high-level executives within the hotel chain. The case was expanding quickly. "It's time, Naira," Jack said. "We're going to proceed with the arrests. I want you to be prepared. This is going to be big." Naira hung up the phone, feeling a mix of relief and tension. Everything she had built, everything she had fought to uncover, was about to explode. But there was still one missing piece: Thomas. She couldn't wait to see him fall. She knew that her father, wherever he was, would finally find peace knowing justice was being served. The power that Thomas and his organization had wielded for so many years was crumbling, and Naira was at the center of that collapse. Vengeance wasn't her only goal, but it was an essential part of the closure she needed. And though fear was still present, she knew the end of this story was near. The truth, finally, would be revealed. At that moment, sitting in the darkness of her hotel room, Naira let the tears fall. Tears of sadness for all she had lost. Tears of joy for all she had achieved. And tears of inspiration for what was to come. She knew the path hadn't been easy, but she was sure it had been worth it. Finally, the truth would shine. And Malik Blackwell's legacy would not be forgotten. Naira woke up early on the morning of the arrests. The sky was overcast, and the city seemed to breathe an air of tension. As she dressed, her thoughts wandered between excitement and uncertainty. She knew that today would mark a turning point, not just for her, but for everything she had fought to reveal. Today, finally, Thomas Fitzpatrick and those responsible for her father's disappearance would be arrested. The phone rang. It was Jack Thompson. "We're ready, Naira. The operation will begin in an hour. The media still knows nothing, but once we start, there'll be no way to stop the storm that will be unleashed." Naira nodded, even though Jack couldn't see her. "Understood, Jack. I'll be watching." She hung up and remained still for a moment, looking at her reflection in the mirror. She had waited years for this day. Her heart was pounding, not just for the justice she was about to obtain, but also for the uncertainty of what would come afterward. Once everything was finally resolved, what would she do? What would be left in her life after having focused all her efforts on this revenge? She shook off those thoughts. First, justice. Everything else could wait. Hours later, Naira sat in a private conference room, awaiting the live broadcast the FBI had prepared. Beside her, Oliver watched her in silence. The room was filled with screens showing various camera angles, all connected to the operation underway. Naira kept her eyes fixed on the images. The SWAT team was already positioned outside the headquarters of the hotel chain. Unmarked vehicles surrounded the building, and agents, dressed in civilian clothes, waited for the right moment to enter. Naira held her breath as she watched the screens. She knew that Thomas Fitzpatrick and other key executives were in that office. They were the ones responsible for the shady dealings, those who had profited from the suffering of others, including her father. "They're about to go in," Oliver whispered, leaning slightly towards her. Suddenly, the operation began. The agents stormed the building, moving with precision and speed. Naira could see Thomas on one of the screens, sitting in his office, completely unaware of what was about to happen. But in seconds, everything changed. The door to his office burst open, and several agents entered with guns drawn. "Police! Hands up!" shouted one of the agents. Thomas's expression was one of pure disbelief. At first, he seemed unable to process what was happening. But when one of the agents pushed him against the desk to handcuff him, his usual arrogance vanished completely. He tried to resist, but it was in vain. As they led him out of the office, with cameras aimed at him, Naira felt a mix of relief and sadness. This man, who had humiliated her and who had partly been responsible for her father's disappearance, would finally face the consequences of his actions. But the emptiness that remained inside her was profound. Revenge wouldn't bring her father back, nor would it ease the years of suffering her family had endured. Oliver watched the scene in silence and then looked at Naira. "We did it, Naira," he said softly. "It all ends today." Naira nodded, but she couldn't help noticing the heaviness in her heart. "Yes," she replied, "we did it. But I feel like there are still so many loose ends. I want answers. I don't just want justice, I want to understand what really happened to my father." Oliver sighed and nodded. "You will understand. Everything will come to light, bit by bit. Sometimes, justice doesn't bring answers right away, but we're on the right path." Naira looked back at the screens. The FBI team was arresting other executives. The operation was progressing efficiently. She knew that news of the arrests would soon be everywhere. The media would descend on the scandal, and the hotel chain's reputation would be destroyed. However, at that moment, the only thing that mattered to her was uncovering the truth about Malik Blackwell. That same afternoon, after the arrests were completed and the operation concluded successfully, Naira returned to the Royal Crest. She felt she needed to be there, as if the place still held more secrets to be revealed. As she walked through the silent corridors, her mind returned to memories of her father. She knew something in this hotel had trapped him, something that had led to his disappearance. She went up to the top floor, where the hotel's most luxurious suite was located, a room that had been used by powerful figures for decades. Upon entering, she stopped at the door, observing the opulence around her. This was the last place her father had been before he disappeared. Every corner of the room seemed to carry an emotional weight, as if the walls held secrets Naira was destined to uncover. While exploring the suite, something in a dark corner of the living room caught her attention, a small hidden door in the wall, barely visible. It was a door that, at first glance, could have gone unnoticed, but Naira, with her instincts sharpened by the constant search for answers, noticed it. She approached slowly and, with some effort, opened it. The door led to a small compartment, almost like a secret chamber. Inside, she found an old, worn wooden box. As she opened it, her hands trembled. Inside the box was a series of letters, all written by her father, Malik Blackwell. Naira felt her heart race as she read them. The letters revealed that her father had been investigating corruption within the hotel chain. He had discovered that they were not only laundering money, but also had connections with international mafias. In one of the letters, Malik mentioned Thomas Fitzpatrick by name, warning that he was one of the main players in the corruption network. But there was something else in those letters. Her father hadn't just been investigating the case for business reasons. There was a personal reason, a much deeper reason. Malik had discovered that one of the leaders of this criminal network was someone close to the family, someone Naira would never have suspected. A name that made her stop, William Blackwell. Her own uncle. Naira dropped the letter, feeling the ground beneath her feet disappear. William, her father's brother, had always been a distant figure in her life, but she would never have imagined that he was involved in something so dark. Her father had tried to protect her from this truth, but now, years later, the truth had come to light. Tears filled Naira's eyes as she processed what she had just discovered. Her uncle had betrayed his own blood, and her father had paid the price for it. Everything fit. Malik had been about to expose the network, and William, to protect himself, had collaborated in his disappearance. Naira stood there, in that suite, holding the letters that revealed her family's bitter betrayal. The truth she had sought for so long was finally before her, but it was more painful than she had imagined. Now, with justice on her side, Naira knew that the battle wasn't over yet. There was one last enemy to face, and this time, the enemy was much closer to home. Naira remained motionless in the Royal Crest suite, holding her father's letters, with the truth burning in her hands. Her own uncle, William Blackwell, had been part of the conspiracy that led to Malik's disappearance. The betrayal, so close and profound, left her stunned. She had imagined many ways her search could end, but she had never expected the truth to be this. Her father's words, written with a shaky but determined hand, revealed a man who had given everything to protect her. Malik had tried to dismantle the corrupt empire from within, but his silent fight ended in betrayal. And now, Naira was about to finish what he had started. Oliver arrived shortly after, finding her in the suite, still seated in front of the open box. Seeing her expression, he didn't need to ask what had happened. Nara showed him the letters and watched as her friend processed the gravity of what he read. "William," said Oliver, shaking his head. "This is worse than we thought." "I knew it. I knew there was more," Nara responded, her voice filled with deep sadness. "But I never imagined my own uncle was involved. He was always distant, but I never suspected he was this deep into it." Oliver moved closer and sat beside her. "William must face the consequences, Nara. You can't let this go unpunished. Not just for what he did to your father, but for what it represents." Nara nodded slowly. She knew. She knew she had to act, that her fight wasn't over. But at the same time, she felt the weight of the decision. She was about to expose a scandal that would not only destroy Thomas Fitzpatrick and his accomplices, but also her own family. The consequences would be devastating, but she also knew it was the only path to justice. That night, Nara returned to her apartment, seeking peace in the silence. She made herself a cup of tea and sat on her balcony, watching the city lights shine in the distance. The cool air brushed her skin as she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She remembered the moments of pain, struggle, and uncertainty, but also the moments of strength and determination. Malik Blackwell had been an honorable man, and Nara, his daughter, had proven worthy of that legacy. She had faced the powerful, the corrupt, and now she was closer than ever to bringing her father the peace he so deserved. The next day, she made the final decision. She would meet with William. She needed to confront him face to face before the world knew the truth. William Blackwell was sitting in his study when Nara arrived at the family home, the same one where she had spent part of her childhood. The atmosphere was heavy, charged with a tension neither could ignore. William looked at her with a tense smile, as if he didn't know exactly why she was there, but sensed nothing good would come from this visit. "Nara," he said cautiously, "it's a pleasure to see you, though it seems something serious has brought you here." She wasted no time. Without preamble, she took the letters from her purse and placed them on the desk in front of him. "You know exactly why I'm here, William. You don't need to pretend anymore. I know everything. I know what you did. And I know you were involved in my father's disappearance." William turned pale at the sight of the letters. He tried to maintain his composure, but the guilt in his eyes was unmistakable. He tried to take a breath, but each one felt heavier. "Nara, I never wanted any of this to happen," he began, his voice breaking. "Malik got involved in something dangerous. I was only trying to protect you, protect the family." Her uncle's words, far from comforting her, awakened a rage she had held back for years. "Protect us? You betrayed him. My father was trying to do the right thing, and you handed him to his enemies. You condemned him." Nara shouted, her hands trembling with the intensity of her anger. William lowered his gaze, unable to meet hers. "We didn't have a choice. The people he was involved with, they were too powerful. They threatened me, Nara. If I hadn't cooperated, they could have destroyed us all. I didn't do it out of malice. I did it because I was afraid." The silence that followed was heavy. Nara watched him, realizing that while William was guilty, he was also a weak man, consumed by his own fear. He wasn't the monster she had imagined, but he was responsible. He had betrayed his brother, and now, Nara had to make a decision, seek revenge or choose justice. "I'm turning you over to the authorities," Nara finally said, her voice firm but without hatred. "I won't let you live with this lie any longer. You'll pay for what you did, William, but I'll do it the right way. No more violence, no more secrets." William nodded, his expression reflecting both relief and resignation. He knew there was no escape, and although the thought of prison terrified him, he seemed to accept his fate. "I'll do what I must," he said in a low voice. Days later, the story of the Blackwells and the hotel chain exploded across the media. The arrests of Thomas Fitzpatrick and other high-ranking executives shook the foundations of the industry. William Blackwell was also arrested, and although he tried to defend himself in court, the evidence against him was overwhelming. Justice was finally taking its course. But for Naira, the story didn't end with those headlines. There was something much deeper that came out of all this, a sense of peace, of closure. She had honored her father by exposing the truth and bringing the guilty to justice. Malik Blackwell, a man who had fought silently against corruption, could now rest in peace, knowing his daughter had continued his fight. Months later, Naira found herself back at the Royal Crest, this time not as an investigator, nor as the woman searching for answers, but as the proud owner of a renewed place. The hotel, under her new management, had blossomed with a new philosophy based on integrity and transparency. For Naira, this wasn't just a business, it was a symbol of everything she had achieved and of what her father represented. That afternoon, as she watched the sunset from the highest suite in the hotel, with a cup of coffee in her hand, she felt she had reached a place of peace. The battle had been long and painful, but it had been worth it. She had lost much along the way, but she had also gained something invaluable, a new understanding of herself, of her strength, and of her capacity to heal. As the sun disappeared on the horizon, Naira smiled, knowing that Malik Blackwell's legacy would live on, not only within the walls of the Royal Crest, but in every decision she would make from that day forward. She had found justice, but more importantly, she had found peace. What did you think of this story? Tell us in the comments what you would do in a similar situation of racism. We invite you to like, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with your friends or family as a show of support. This motivates us to keep posting exciting stories almost every day. Don't miss the next surprising narrative about to appear on your screen. We value having you here with us. You can click on the links appearing on your screen now. We have an exclusive selection of captivating stories and guaranteed entertainment especially for you. See you in the next video. Take care.